I'm Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, our exclusive interview with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, his take on data privacy and security and competition with Amazon in the cloud. Plus, the red cyber threat. A new report reveals that targeted and persistent intrusion attempts by Chinese hackers are on the rise. CrowdStrike's chief technology officer outlines the sectors most under attack. And Snap's turning to television to keep teens hooked. We talk about the social network's push into original programming and whether it will pay off. But first to our top story and our exclusive sit-down with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella on Wednesday from the Naval Academy in Annapolis. This week, Microsoft boasted it will obtain top federal security authorizations early next year, bolstering the company's position in the Pentagon's winner-take-all competition for a multi-billion-dollar cloud computing deal. Nadella sat down with our own Caroline Hyde for an extended interview Wednesday. They spoke about the race for the Pentagon deal, artificial intelligence, and, of course, a topic on everyone's mind, data privacy.
At Microsoft, for all of our existence, we've always had Department of Defense as a customer, and many other federal agencies. In fact, tomorrow we have our government summit, where we're going to talk about everything that we're doing, from the Department of Labor to the Department of Agriculture to FEMA, and the Veterans Affairs and so on. So because I think we are broadly investing in what is our competitive differentiation of bringing cloud technology and our edge technology, which I think is more and more relevant to more and more of our taxpayer dollars being spent well, so that we can get more efficiencies out of the IT infrastructure that needs to power all of these institutions. So we are very, what should I say, focused on making sure we bring the best technology and compete in any of these contracts that get put out for competitive bid.
Does it ever, with the focus on security, which must be in front of mind when you're serving anything federally, whether you're serving the government, how much do you think there is a focus at the moment, enough of a focus on security, and then, you as a company have managed to find midterm election potential attacks coming from the likes of Russia? How are you looking at cybersecurity? How are you ensuring that you're at the cutting edge? And is it tackleable at the moment?
I mean, I think that some of the best work that we're doing when it comes to even AI is to really help with the cybersecurity posture. I mean, in fact, I always say this, which is the most important thing that we as a company can do and have as an asset is our cybersecurity or operational security posture. We have something like 6.5 trillion security events that we see, 450 billion logins a month across all of our properties, 1.2 billion devices we scan, maybe a couple of billion malware we inspect. So all that has to be converted into operational security and operational security health for all our customers. I mean, a good example of that is what happened with Strontium. Basically, we saw that attacker group was attacking some of the folks in the Senate and some of the affiliated groups with the Republican Party, and with phishing attacks. And so we realized that we needed to get hold of those domains, and this is where it's not just about the technology, but it's even the policy work we did, and with working with the legal infrastructure to be able to transfer those domains and then sinkhole the traffic. And another example is, in fact, nowadays cyber criminals are being very precise, or should I say, targeting small businesses, and that's a big issue because consumers and small businesses suffer the most when it comes to cyber attacks. And this was a group called UrSNIF, or an attack called UrSNIF, which was attacking in small businesses in Johnson City, Tennessee, and we were able to detect this and get rid of it on first sight, which is really one of the big challenges of AI. And so We're doing work there, as well as in IoT, because the next big security attack is not going to come from your conventional email being compromised or a computer endpoint. It's going to come from the HVAC system. So 9 billion microcontrollers are shipped in the world, and we really now have, with Azure Sphere, a silicon design as well as a security service and a secure operating system that help us ensure that all microcontrollers going forward can be secured.
Talking there about software issues and hardware issues and safety. We've of course seen a Bloomberg Businessweek piece which has looked about the concerns of supply chain strength. Is this something that you think is fully secure when you look at Microsoft and can be going forward when we have such strength of attacks, as you say, that you keep picking up on?
Yeah, I mean, look, when it comes to operational security, including, I'll call it silicon supply chain or software supply chain, it's all about every day being in the gym and practicing. And in our case, in this particular incident, we're very confident that we have no exposure, but we've got a lot of people dedicated to it, a lot of technology dedicated to it, a lot of rigor and process dedicated to ensuring our supply chains, as I said, both silicon and software, to be secure.
Wrapped up with the cybersecurity conversation is that of privacy. Do you think the legislative agenda is where it should be, regulation is where it needs to be when it comes to privacy of individuals' data and when it comes to the security of company data?
I mean, it's a great set of questions, but we're already living in a world where, for example, I think the secular movement around individual data is that you should think of privacy as a human right, and GDPR out of Europe, in some sense, legislates that. And so we've done a lot of work implementing that in our products, and we have taken some of the rights from GDPR and made it available globally. And so I think that this is something that the United States will look at. I know California has looked at it. We hope that there's more of a national privacy law, because I think we don't want increased transaction costs that in fact are going to harm more of the small businesses, not large companies like Microsoft. But if you really want a level playing field, I think having a legislative framework that reduces transactional costs and even causes new entrepreneurs to be able to adopt it as a very important thing. The other one I would say is Cloud Act. I think the United States, I'm very pleased to see us, because after all we had to go to the Supreme Court and fight our own government on this case multiple times, but we did, in a bipartisan way, work with the legislative bodies to get Cloud Act passed. And it's fantastic, because I think that really creates a new equilibrium of how nations can balance their need for privacy on one end and national security on the other end. And this is something that I'm hoping that will now be bilateral deals between the United Kingdom and the United States and other governments, which I think is very needed.
Satya, you helm a fascinating company because it is more than 40 years old, as you were on stage talking about. It's been through its education process. It's looked at regulators over the years. It's evolved. It's made sure that it's now still one of the most valuable companies in the world, cutting on $1 trillion. How do you look at some of the other big technology giants that are grown in the US and see them having to evolve and catch up in some ways to some of the charges and arguments and indeed resolutions that you've had to find in your past? What experiences can you give to them? Do you think they're all dealing with it in the right way as they evolve?
I can only speak for our own experience and what we are trying to do. And I think we as an all-up tech industry, I don't say this as sort of some kind of a terms of competition between us. I think all up, when I look back in our own history between, say, 1975 to now, technology and its importance in our societies and in our economies has gone through a sea change. The tech industry itself is just 5% of our GDP, and yet I think its influence on the rest of the 95% is far greater than it ever has been in our history. And so therefore I think all of us, including Microsoft, and starting with us, is to be comfortable knowing that we will be held to a different standard. And that's what I think about as Microsoft, and how, everything from what's our operational security posture to what is our ethics, how are we going to, in some sense, even go and ask for regulation, where I think it'll create more of a rule of law and a framework for us to make progress, especially in liberal democracy. So I think that these are all the places where there needs to be a level of maturity way beyond, I think, day-to-day competition.
Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella speaking exclusively with Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde. Still ahead in the best of Bloomberg technology, fresh evidence in Bloomberg's China hacking scoop. Spy hardware discovered on the servers at a major U.S. telecom company. Those servers were removed just a month ago. Details next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. On Tuesday, new evidence revealed a major U.S. telecommunications company was the latest caught up in the Chinese computer hack revealed by Bloomberg Businessweek. The company discovered the manipulated hardware from Supermicro equipment in its network and removed it in August. Bloomberg Tech executive editor for Global Tech, Tom Giles, explained.
The supply chain remains under threat. The Chinese do have ways of getting at the components that end up in our data centers, in U.S. data centers. In this instance, researchers working on behalf of this telecom company found this, it's a slightly different type of manipulation, but again, hardware was manipulated, hardware that originated in China, that made its way into into the U.S. supply chain, had been manipulated at its origin in China, and it was found out, and it's been removed. So what it does is it indicates that again, parts of the supply chain do remain vulnerable.
And in this case, you have a researcher who has come forward, named in the story, and talked about.
So he's putting his reputation on the line here. He's talked about what they found, what happened when they, kind of how they reached the conclusions that they came to. We've seen the documents. We've run them by other people who do security, who understand how this works, and they have, indicated to us that his approach makes sense.
Now, what was different in terms of how this hardware was compromised from the previous report?
Previously, this has to do with the Ethernet connection, so this is what we use to connect to telecommunications networks. That's what's different in this case, but what's similar is its supply chain originated in China, and it has to do with hardware. And Supermicro, once again, is the company at the heart. Now, in Yossi's instance, Applebaum, the researcher, he says Supermicro is a victim here, and he says that Supermicro is not the only one that is used as a conduit. So we're definitely pursuing all of those angles.
Supermicro continues to deny,
correct,
even this latest story, saying the security of our customers and the integrity of our products are core to our business and our company values. We take care to secure the integrity of our products throughout the manufacturing process, and supply chain security is an important topic of discussion for our industry. We have no knowledge of any unauthorized components and have not been informed by any customer that such components have been found. You have Apple and Amazon continuing to deny the original story. You have U.S. and U.K. government officials weighing in and saying there's no reason to doubt the company's
what the
denials.
Companies have said, right.
How do we square that?
So the companies have talked about their involvement, right? They've said that we didn't discover these chips in our networks. So again, we've had to weigh that against what we've been told by a multitude of sources.
17 unnamed sources and now an 18th named source.
Right, although he's not talking directly about Amazon and Apple, to be clear. They have stuck to their denials, and they're very detailed, and we take them very seriously. DHS has come out. We're also, as we've said in our stories, we're not. It's possible that they aren't involved, that they don't have oversight over those agencies that are involved in the investigation that we've talked about, that we've written about.
Why might the telecom industry have been targeted, and what could the consequences of that be?
Well, I mean, it's the
telecom industry.
It's the telecommunications industry. It's these are the networks over which all of our communications, our emails, our phone calls are traveling. So it would seem to me a logical target of someone who wanted to understand communications, sensitive communications, and or wanted to eavesdrop on IP. We're not clear exactly what the intent was here, a little bit less clear than we were before, which was very much IP and whatever sensitive communications that were traveling over the networks. Less clear in this instance what the motivation would have been. But again, it's the telecommunications network, so pretty central to all of the communications that are traveling over our networks.
All right. Well, I know you and your team are continuing to report out this story. We are staying tuned for any developments. Bloomberg Tech's Tom Giles, thanks so much. We should note that Bloomberg LP has been a Supermicro customer, but has found no evidence to suggest that Bloomberg has been affected by the hardware issues raised in the article. Meantime, a new report from cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike reveals China posed the largest cyber threat over the last 6 months. The company's Overwatch report reveals Chinese adversaries have made targeted and persistent intrusion attempts at multiple sectors of the economy, from biotech and defense to pharma and transportation. I spoke to CrowdStrike Chief Technology Officer Dmitry Alperovich and asked him about both pressing matters.
The big headline from the report really is that China is back. When you look at the last couple of years, we actually saw a precipitous decline in Chinese nation-state-sponsored intrusion activity against the commercial sector in 2016, right after the Obama administration struck that agreement with President Xi that both countries would stop conducting industrial espionage against each other. And the Chinese largely abided by that agreement for the time. But then in the last year and a half, we started to see pickup in activity. And now we're just seeing a lot of intrusions in all sectors of the economy, whether it's biotech, pharmaceuticals, high tech, professional services, hospitality, insurance, mining, all types of sectors where the Chinese are breaking in and stealing intellectual property. And now, as opposed to before, it's mostly the Ministry of State Security, their civilian intelligence arm, that's doing most of this activity, versus the People's Liberation Army, the military that was doing a lot of that activity before 2015.
Now, Bloomberg has published an extensive investigation that found that the Chinese implanted spy chips on the motherboards of Supermicro servers that then ended up at some 30 U.S. companies and the U.K. and U.S. governments. What's your reaction to this report? We've also got a new story out today that a similar situation was found at a U.S. telecom.
Well, supply chain has always been a concern, and we're actually seeing China and Russia and others leveraging the software supply chain in their attacks, where they're compromising software and leveraging the updates for that software to actually introduce malicious code into environments. We haven't personally seen any hardware-based attacks like the ones that those stories are talking about. The interesting thing about hardware, of course, is physical. Someone can actually physically look at it and verify whether there's an implant on those systems or not. So I think there's a lot more to learn still as those stories unfolding.
Now, I should mention that the companies involved have denied this. UK and US government officials have said there's no reason to doubt the denials. But that said, is this within the scope of something that the Chinese are capable of?
It's certainly possible. This seems like a very expensive and very difficult effort to go through to achieve that objective, knowing, of course, that they're able to do this through the compromise of software supply chains or just direct intrusions into companies like what we're seeing now. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities, but I think there's still a lot of questions to be answered here.
So based on your reporting, what are you most concerned about? You talk about the relationship between nation states, government arms, and their criminal counterparts within those nation states, and that you're continuing to see a blurring of these lines.
That's right. We're seeing increasingly criminal groups adopting nation-state techniques, nation-state tools, and tradecraft in order to break into organizations. So increasingly, as nation-states are coming up with a lot of the innovation, a lot of the new exploits and discovering new vulnerabilities, very, very quickly that dissipates into the criminal underground, and those criminals are now using those techniques to break into companies. The biggest threat to companies, of course, is destructive attacks like the WannaCry attacks and NotPetya attacks we had seen from North Korea and Russia, respectively, in the last year. And those types of attacks can take down organizations for weeks at a time. We worked on a number of cases around those attacks last year, and companies have suffered literally tens of millions of dollars, some hundreds of millions of dollars in damage because of them.
We've got a midterm election coming up here in the United States. How concerned are you about the security and the integrity of those elections?
Well, in general, election systems remain quite vulnerable. Candidates in particular are still not focusing as much as they should be on their security and the security of their campaigns. It's a very difficult problem given the distributed nature of these campaigns and oftentimes that they have volunteers working off personal devices. However, we're not yet seeing any major interference efforts in this election cycle, in the midterms, but it's always a concern.
So what's the defense? I mean, what's the best defense at this point?
Well, it's interesting because the U.S. government, the White House, has come out with their cyber strategy in the last couple of weeks that outlines the fact that deterrence needs to be a big focus going forward. Deterring nation states like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea from conducting these activities in the first place, that we can't just focus on defense alone. We actually need to find pressure points against those nation states, which don't necessarily have to be cyber. They can be economic, they can be diplomatic, leveraging really the full toolkit of the U.S. power along with our allies to pressure those nation states to stop orchestrating these attacks against us.
You also document increased targeting of the biotech industry. You know, how successful have those attacks been, and what are the consequences?
Well, this has been a big focus for China in the last year and a half. We're seeing a lot of intrusions into various biotech startups and more established companies. And this is all part of the Chinese Made in China 2025 plan that they are working towards, where they want to see China being a major competitor on the global stage in this sector as well as other sectors. They want to see domestic industry thrive in those sectors. And they're doing that in part by stealing our intellectual property in order to shortcut that time for R&D, understand what mistakes not to make and where to place their bets.
You know, it's clear that China has these ambitions. It's clear that China is a threat, as you've so well detailed. I mean, do you think the response from U.S. companies and U.S. and U.K. governments should be to move the supply chain or to, you know, sort of divert some of these products that are being made in China to other countries?
Well, there's no question that if you're operating in China, if you're manufacturing things in China, if you're developing in China, you absolutely have to worry about the compromise of your supply chain. You have to worry about intrusions from Chinese competitors and sometimes even Chinese partners into your networks that are stealing your intellectual property. And there needs to be done more to confront China and the Chinese government on these issues. The Trump administration has started towards that with the report that the U.S. Trade Administration released earlier this spring outlining in almost 300 pages all the things that the Chinese are doing to steal intellectual property, and that's something that needs to be a continued focus going forward. We cannot allow them to take our intellectual property, really the richness of this country that drives our innovation, and steal that wholesale.
CrowdStrike Chief Technology Officer and co-founder Dmitry Alperovitch there. Coming up in the Best of Bloomberg Technology, Tesla shares soared Tuesday after Macquarie joined the bulls, saying the company is on track to reach profitability. Is it time to talk about a Tesla turnaround? This is Bloomberg. Facebook is going head-to-head with Amazon and Google with its first ever smart speaker unveiled Monday. It's called Portal, and it comes with a display optimized for video chat. Portal and its larger alternative, Portal Plus, are designed to simplify video chatting and can track and follow your movement. So if you move, so does the camera. Rather than constantly adjusting a phone or tablet, Portal automatically identifies people in the room and keeps them in the frame. Consumers have bought into similar devices like the Amazon Echo Show. But with Facebook's recent privacy scandals, will Portal be considered creepy or convenient? Vice President of Portal, Rafa Camargo, joined us to answer that question.
It's also a great speaker, it's a great video player device, and it also incorporates Alexa as a general home assistant. But obviously it's a device for your home, so privacy is paramount and very important. And we designed privacy from the ground up. The fact that we had to build the hardware and the software to really change the way people communicate allowed us actually to put privacy on every layer of the stack.
Facebook Vice President Rafa Camargo there. Up next, another bullish call on Tesla gave shares a boost this week. We'll talk Tesla turnaround just ahead. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Tesla shares soared Tuesday after Macquarie joined the bulls, saying the company is on track to reach profitability. So, is it time to talk about a Tesla turnaround? Macquarie senior analyst Maynard joined us to explain his call.
I think the most important thing really is that Elon Musk is really just focused on building Model 3s and getting deliveries out there. Anything that really just gets that focus down to that, I think is actually a very positive thing. So if James Murdoch's the one who can actually rein him in and prevent some of that the tweets going out, and the focus really comes back to the deliveries, which is really the fundamentals of the business, I think that will end up being a very positive for the company.
Well, the question, Max, is can James Murdoch rein him in? I mean, James Murdoch has been on the board, and Elon Musk's behavior has been as it has been.
No, I mean, I think the reining in is going to have to come from Elon himself, and just because of the sort of his larger-than-life profile, the extent to which kind of his sort of personality has defined Tesla. I think if you believe in this company, what you are hoping for is that Elon himself will see the light, not that the SEC or a board member or someone else is going to do that for him. And I think if we've seen anything, we've learned anything over the last few months is that Elon, even when Tesla has been dinged for various reasons, he's still been willing to kind of be his own person. And so yeah, I mean, I think that the chairmanship is important. It's an important milestone for the company, but I don't think that alone is going to bring much change.
So, Maynard, talk to us about how you came to your conclusion that this is a buy, and in the face of some staunch opposition, from the bears. I just mentioned an earlier analyst who believes actually Tesla shares are going to go in the opposite direction.
So my big call here really is we're taking an angle of looking at the sector really from a disruptive perspective and from a technology angle, which I've covered for the past 20 years. And a lot of people will talk about electric and autonomous as really kind of being the disruptors. We look at it as really kind of the enablers, and I think this is going to enable a platform ecosystem. So think about developers building applications directly on top of the car, and it'll turn that car into an application. So you download something, you press a button, and then you turn that vehicle into a ride-sharing vehicle, or you download a different app and turn it into a delivery vehicle. And ultimately, the reason why we're so bullish on Tesla is because if you actually look at the commercial technology that's already built into the car, a lot of those platform ecosystem technology is already there. And that's what makes us really positive on the long-term story for Tesla.
Now, we know that production numbers over the last several weeks have looked good, but what we don't know is if Tesla can sustain that level of production over the next few weeks. You are optimistic here. You believe production numbers will look good. You believe Tesla will reach profitability, but what has to happen in order for that to happen in your view?
So you're absolutely right. Our outperformance is definitely predicated on the near term and them being able to generate cash. We've done a lot of work around zero-emission vehicle credits, and we think in the back half of this year they can generate somewhere in the neighborhood of around $500 million. And remember, there's no cost associated with this, so this is going to be pure cash flow, which I think helps in addition to the free cash flow generation that I think they'll get going into the third and into the fourth quarter. And then I also think that they have some unused debt commitments that they can also tap, which will be more than enough to cover the debt commitments that are coming up over the next 3 quarters.
Now, Max, we're getting some new information that Tesla is closing in on a $145 million plot for its China factory. Obviously, China, a huge part of Tesla's potential. What does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big deal. The Chinese market for electric cars is, massive. Tesla really hasn't made much progress there at all. And if Tesla is able to get into the market and really sell some cars, that will go a long way to sort of improving its bottom line and just generating huge amounts of revenue. Of course, with China, especially in the Donald Trump era, there are always regulatory hurdles. So, being able to find a location for this factory, that's an important, kind of first step in terms of building a factory.
Macquarie senior analyst Maynard on Wednesday. Up next, Snap's putting TV in your pocket with a slew of new original productions. We'll look at the strategy in just a moment. And the UN's latest climate report paints a grim picture in the battle against global warming. Can tech play a role in saving the planet? That is ahead. This is Bloomberg. Snap will release a dozen original series on its mobile app as the social network bets on a new entertainment lineup to maintain its grip on teen users and give it an edge over Instagram. We spoke to Raymond James internet analyst Aaron Kessler Wednesday and Bloomberg Tech Sarah Fryer, who covers Snap, on whether the play will be a success.
This is a completely new slate of programming. For a while, they've really encouraged outside content partners to make media for Snap and that then sort of build their brands in separate channels on the company's Discover page. Now they're doing it themselves in-house, and I think that they really want to demonstrate that they can do a kind of show that's very mobile first, that goes directly to that younger audience that Snap is known for reaching. The question is whether it will really attract users and growth down the line.
All the shows are shot vertically. One of them is called Endless Summer, a successor to MTV's Laguna Beach. Aaron, is this the sneak secret to Snap's future?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big question. I mean, so far, Snap's had limited traction with some of its, we think, content offerings. If you look at the Discover side, most of the time spent on Snap is still within kind of the messaging part of the app, and we think that continues to be the case. The problem with that is messaging historically is not monetized as well. So to monetize, they are going to have to do things like the Discover side with more content, with more original programming. And that's a big question, and Snap's not the only one going after this. You have Facebook with the Watch tab, Instagram just announced kind of Instagram TV recently as well. Obviously, you have Netflix, Amazon Prime, so a lot of fragmentation on the content side. But yeah, I think for Snap to do well and to get more ad dollars, they're going to have to show more traction on these type of offerings.
Well, and Sarah, Snap executives have come out saying that these shows have been a raving success and that they have multi-millions of viewers. You know, how many people are actually watching these shows?
Well, what matters is not just how many people are watching individual shows, but whether that number grows. Snap last quarter announced a decline in daily users for the first time, and that has caused a shockwave through the markets, thinking that maybe this company is not going to get to a size big enough to compete with the Facebooks and Googles of the world for advertising dollars. So what they really have to do is prove that side, that media aspect of the app, can be a big money maker down the line. And there just isn't enough public information on how those shows are doing to really instill confidence. And certainly Wall Street is not too excited about these shows. The stock is down today, hovering below $7 for the first time.
Aaron, original content aside, how optimistic are you that Snap can continue to grow? I mean, they're losing high-profile executives. The redesign has been a bust. Evan Spiegel has said they have to get back to their roots, which is about communicating quickly. But is it all enough to get back to growth?
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't seen it yet. We're still cautious on Snap overall. While getting back to the roots of communication, fast messaging, fast sharing of photos is important for them, that doesn't really generate revenues like Newsfeed does with Facebook. So that's the problem they're trying to solve. You can't have it both ways. You can't just be a great messaging app at the same time make a lot of money on the advertising side with creating a great user experience. You need to have a little bit of both. We still like to see more product innovation. I think originals could help on that. But so far, I think there is a stat only about 20-25% of users go to like the Discover side of the app on a daily basis. That's a pretty low percentage that are not using kind of these content services from Snap.
Sarah, Evan Spiegel recently released a very long memo to employees where he talked about how the company had lost focus, how it has to get back to its roots. Some folks were making fun of his use of the word cheetah, which is the code name for this redesign. He didn't back away from cheetah entirely, but said certainly it wasn't working so far, but that everyone as a consolation prize would be getting a cheetah-themed sweatshirt. What do you make of this memo? What do investors think about this memo?
Well, I spent a lot of time with Evan Spiegel earlier this year, and the memo echoed a lot of the same things that he was trying to get across to me then, which is that the company sees itself differently than the other social media platforms, that they don't even see themselves really as a social media company. It's more of a messaging company with a media component, and that they want to allow people to experience the world differently. While Evan is trying to communicate more directly to his employees and address some issues with clarity around the company's direction, a 15-page memo is not always the best way to get that across. And certainly, while some people thought that this was a good eye into how Spiegel thinks, other people thought, it was a little rambling, a little concerning. And so I think that he's still in that place where he has to prove that he is the visionary leader for the next era of Snap. Otherwise, an analyst yesterday said they may have to raise money. There may be M&A down the line. I mean, he has to. This next quarter is going to be so crucial for the company's future.
Aaron, I'm sure many of these tech CEOs, don't love speaking to the press, but, now they do. We've seen Mark Zuckerberg mature. In this memo, Evan Spiegel talks about how he feels awkward even walking around the office and talking to employees. He doesn't love speaking to the press. But, at this point, this many years into being a public company, do you think he has to grow up? Do you think he's still the right person to be, leading this company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's less important whether he's speaking to the press. It's more about company execution, and so far they haven't executed. I mean, if you look at the shareholder letter, it talked a lot about their competitive moats, but at the same time you're talking about competitive moats, you're also losing a lot of users to Instagram, it appears. And they talk about competitive moats being their speed of delivery, although you really haven't heard of users complain on Instagram or Facebook that they're not getting pictures or text sent fast enough. So it's a little confusing, that shareholder letter. I think investors were confused. I think that's why the stock did not really rally off of that letter.
Raymond James, Aaron Kessler, along with Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Fryer there. Coming up, the UN gives the world just 1 decade to get a handle on global warming. We'll look at how tech could be part of the solution next. This is Bloomberg. The latest climate report from the United Nations paints a grim picture. The world is teetering on the edge of failure when it comes to containing global warming. And the solution comes at a cost. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says the world must invest $2.4 trillion into clean energy every year through 2035 and cut the use of coal-fired power to almost nothing by 2050, just to avoid catastrophic damage from climate change. The report notes the atmosphere is already 1 degree Celsius warmer than it was at the start of the Industrial Revolution and predicts that will rise to 3 degrees by 2100. That is double the pace targeted in the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. So, will technology be able to save the planet? On Monday, we spoke to Bloomberg News sustainability editor Eric Roston and Emily Mazzacurati, who is an expert in climate adaptation and resilience, and the founder and CEO of 427, a provider of market intelligence on climate change.
This is the report that was commissioned by the UN 2 years ago after the Paris Accords. And it doesn't deliver great news. It presents a very strict timeline that we have to reduce global emissions before 2030. They suggest that something on the order of 55 or 60% cuts in global emissions below last year levels by 2030, and then zeroing out emissions by 2050. So that is a huge challenge and represents ambition we have not yet seen, even from the nations that were so supportive of the Paris Agreement 3 years ago.
Emily, what's your take on these numbers?
Well, the technology is there to reduce emissions, but we haven't been deploying it at scale. We haven't been investing enough. And what the report points out as well is that to keep emissions under a level that would limit the impacts of climate change, we need to capture a lot of carbon emissions, and this is technology that is not ready at scale.
So talk to us about how we get there. I mean, what's it going to take for that technology to be ready?
Well, for technology to be useful, someone needs to turn it on, and nobody has turned on the technology at this point to the scale that is needed. We don't have the political will, certainly not in the US, but even in other countries, it's not moving fast enough. And we don't have the investments to follow suit. The technology is there for carbon-free energy, for reducing emissions across a number of activities, and also for preparing and adapting to climate change. We're just not using it.
So
right
who
now.
needs to turn it on? I mean, who are the people who can make this happen, and the companies that can make this happen?
Right. So the obvious answer is governments, but governments may not be there yet. So there's a lot going on in the private sector, and there has been a lot of mobilization from investors and from corporations to invest. That needs to come with a regulatory push. It can't just be all one, because the companies that are pushing this type of effort are still a minority compared to the broader set of corporations out there.
Right. Eric, what's the likelihood that big tech or big business could do some of this on their own?
We already see really hopeful stories from around the world of enormous investment in technologies that have matured in some ways faster than even close watchers of the space would have believed, particularly in solar, in wind power, and the electrification of automobiles. I'd like to echo Emily's point about the carbon capture technologies. These are very interesting projects that are getting a lot of attention and some money. But one thing that's worth considering, we also saw today the awarding of the 2018 Nobel Prize in Economics to William Nordhaus of Yale University. And he's spent most of the last 3 or 4 decades trying to understand the relationship between what cost of pollution is, what is the appropriate price for a ton of emissions, with the consequent reduction in emissions. And so many economists will tell you that people respond to prices, people respond to incentives, and having a price on carbon, the economists will tell you, and there are many experiments around the world, may be needed to get these technologies up and running in time to meet the challenges outlined today in the report.
Emily, what are the consequences if this stuff doesn't happen? What is the difference between 1 degree Celsius and 3 degrees Celsius?
We're already seeing the consequences of not having done our homework before, and we're seeing it today. We're seeing it with extreme weather events, a new hurricane barreling down Florida. Japan just had 9 typhoons in the past season, which is insane when you think of it. So the impacts are already there. They're only going to get worse, and a ½ degree difference between 1.5 Celsius degree by 2040 or 2 degrees make a tremendous difference. This is the average across the entire Earth, and so you have to imagine the amount of changes that need to happen to move the needle by ½ degree globally. And that means more extreme weather events. That means water scarcity. That means more wildfires. That means sea level rise and losing our coastlines. That means a tremendous amount of impact that we're not currently adequately prepared for.
Eric, meantime, you've got some big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, teaming up to develop AI to identify impending famine. Talk to us about how this works.
That was it's a very interesting project that was announced today by those particular tech leaders. And the goal of that project is to look for natural and social metrics that when certain alarm bells go off among each of them, it may be an overall early warning signal, could be interpreted as an overall early warning signal for famine. One thing that's interesting and gets lost in our sort of voluminous talk every day about big data and AI is that climate and weather were sort of the original big data topics going back to the 1960s. Pattern recognition and machine learning in some ways cut their teeth very early on these topics. And so 4 or 5 decades later now, what we're seeing is this really interesting marriage of highly sophisticated, highly advanced, cutting-edge AI being applied to sort of less cutting-edge, sort of kludgy, government-supported models that evolved over the last few decades, and that combination of this old approach to modeling with these new AI tools is producing some really interesting startups at exactly the time we're going to need them most.
Bloomberg's Eric Roston and 427 CEO Emily Mazzacurati. We should note Michael Bloomberg, founder and majority owner of Bloomberg News and its parent company Bloomberg LP, is a UN Special Envoy for Climate Action. Well, one way to phase out fossil fuels quickly is the push to electric cars. On that note, Audi just unveiled its Tesla Challenger, the e-tron. And one of the most interesting bits of the glitzy launch was its approach to plugging the car in. Audi has teamed up with tech giant Amazon, which will arrange installing home chargers for e-tron buyers. Nat Bullard, analyst for Bloomberg NEF and contributor to Bloomberg Opinion, weighed in.
Amazon is going to use what it calls its home services division to do installation of these chargers. And home services is one that actually, if I confess, I've not ever used before, because it's one of these things for infrequent big purchases, things you might only do once or twice in a home's lifetime, like a refrigerator or a washing machine or a home charger. So what this is doing is removing quite a bit of the friction out of doing something that you don't do that often. So it's an intriguing way to just simplify a process. You might know what charger you want. In fact, I'm sure that Audi would have a preferred set of chargers that's there for any given e-tron purchaser. This just simplifies the process of getting somebody in the home, having them take care of the paperwork, and having them do all the connection for you.
What is the significance of this for Amazon, assuming this is only a teeny tiny little sliver of their business, and for Tesla, for which this is a huge part of their business?
Right. So it's a good question. I'll take the Tesla part first. So for Tesla, and I gave a little talk about this last week at a big conference in London, it was essentially existential, right? You had this chicken and egg problem. You can build great cars, but without a network, you can't really charge them up. And without a bunch of chargers, you're not going to sell a lot of cars. So what Tesla did is simply build the network first. For Amazon, this is far, far different from that, in the sense that I doubt this would be materially significant even in any given decade in the future. But what it's intriguing for, to me, is that it's sort of getting Amazon into the home in yet another way. And
so
it's
you
got
don't
an
think this
intriguing
could
angle
become?
there. Yep.
You don't think this could
Go ahead.
become a much bigger business for Amazon?
So I went with a little thought experiment on it myself, which was, last week, or a couple weeks ago rather, Amazon released a whole slew of new Alexa connected gadgets, and one of them was a microwave. And what struck me about that is that it simplifies a process that is full of menus, options, opaque attempts to do something, and replaces it with just, Alexa, there's a slice of pizza in there, heat it up for me. And my thinking was, electric charging is another thing very similar to that. It's got a lot of latency in it, in the sense that you've got some time involved. There's a bunch of decisions you might need to make to optimize, but you probably don't want to do. And my thinking was, let's say that Amazon rolls out its own charger in the future, and let's say you just drive in there, plug in, and say, Amazon, I'm not going out, or Alexa, I'm not going out tonight, charge me up. And then let's imagine further that it's, say, all you want charging just as part of your Prime account, or something like that.
Nat Bullard, analyst for Bloomberg NEF and contributor to Bloomberg Opinion there. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We will bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. You can tune in every day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.